I wonder if you ever wrestle with doubt. In fact, I know you do. All of us wrestle with doubt at times. My name is Adam Hamilton. I'm the author of this book, Wrestling with Doubt, Finding Faith. And last year, we surveyed 1,000 people inside and outside the church. We asked these questions. Do you wrestle with doubt? How often do you wrestle with doubt? What are the sources of your doubt when it comes to faith? And then what's the outcome of your wrestling with doubt? We took the 6 most frequently given responses to the question, what is it that leads you to doubt? And we placed them in this book, offering helpful responses, we hope, for people who wrestle with doubt. Here's the titles. The introduction of the book is In Praise of Honest Doubt, recognizing that doubt can and should be a good thing as it leads us to a deeper faith. And then, is there a God? The most foundational question. And then when it comes to the Bible, what about the things we wrestle with in the Bible? How do we make sense of that? And then, do all non-Christians go to hell? That showed up as part of the top 6 questions people wrestled with. Is heaven real? And what happens when my prayers go unanswered? How do I make sense of that? And then finally, why did the innocent suffer? I'd like to give you this invitation. If you wrestle with doubt, I'd like to invite you to pick up the book, read it, and see if it's not helpful for you in finding faith.
Good morning, friends. Thanks for letting me speak to you on video today. I know it's weird to walk into a church service and see a sermon on video, but this does enable me to speak during the first week of this new series on a topic I care deeply about while I'm in Mexico. I'm with our Mexico mission team right now, serving at Niños de Baja, an orphanage about 50 miles south of San Diego. And thank you to those who sponsor kids at Niños and who have donated hygiene items to bless the kids at Niños. And what that means is, as we speak, I'm getting my butt kicked by 10 and 11-year-olds in soccer. I have absolutely no chance against these kids, but we're here painting homes, the different homes that the kids live in, maybe doing some organizing, some cleanup. And like any mission trip, we're the ones who end up being blessed more than the people that we're supposed to go serve. So thank you for praying for us and for supporting the kids at Niños. And thanks for letting me speak to you on video today. So today's the first Sunday in Lent, which is a 6-week season of preparation for Easter. And it's the first Sunday in our brand new Lent series based on this book, Wrestling with Doubt, Finding Faith by Adam Hamilton. And if you would like to participate in this all-church study of this book, you just buy a book wherever you buy books. And the sermon every week is based on a chapter of the book. And then you read that chapter, and then you can sign up for one of any 3 new Connect groups that are discussing the chapter every week. So you hear the sermon, you do your own reading, and then you can get into a Connect group and discuss that same chapter. If you want to join a Connect group, go to wellchurch.org, and there's a graphic that says Connect groups on it. Just click on that. You see the 3 groups listed. One starts today, actually, and then another one this Thursday, and then another one the following Wednesday. Each group has a corresponding Facebook group. Just click on that, just for ease of communication. Click on the Facebook group, and then you just show up at that Connect group. One of them is online, and 2 of them are in person, and you can participate in the all church study. So hope that you do, and that you can use this season of Lent to grow, and we can all grow together. And in this study, we're talking about subjects like, does God exist? And something that comes out of that, what is the relationship between faith and reason? And can we use our brains? Can thinking people take their faith seriously? Take the Bible seriously? Take spirituality seriously? There are questions that many people have, like, is heaven real? And who gets to go to heaven? Who is saved? And then why does it seem to be that some prayers go unanswered? These are common questions and doubts that people have and that Adam has compiled here. Of course, there are lots of other ones. In your Connect groups, you might kind of go off on tangents, and that's okay, depending on maybe some of the questions that you have. But those are the kinds of questions that we're covering in this series. And today, I'm starting with chapter 1, Does God Exist? And related to that, what is the relationship between our logic and our ability to think rationally and faith? Can faith and reason go together? Or if I'm going to be a good Christian, does that mean I have to check my brain at the door and pretend that I don't have any questions and doubts? There are millions of Christians, obviously, who believe that doubt is an enemy to their faith, that asking questions is an enemy, a threat to their faith. Is that the case? That's what we're talking about today. Am I allowed to think for myself as an intellectually curious, intellectually honest person and take my faith seriously? So the starting place for us today is that not only do I believe that it's okay to be honest about your questions and your doubts, not only do I think it's permissible, right? Like, okay, yeah, we'll go ahead and let you express your questions and doubts. My faith tells me that it's actually a good thing and an expected thing that you would have questions and doubts about your faith as a thinking person. Why do I say that? It's actually contained in what Jesus considered what we call the greatest commandment, the main thing. When someone came to Jesus and asked him, Jesus, what does it mean to be righteous? What does it mean to be on Team God? What does it mean to be a good person? What does God require of me? And this is what Jesus said to that person. It comes from Matthew chapter 22. Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So the greatest commandment is what Jesus says is the main thing. What does it mean to be somebody who wants God in your life? What does it mean to follow Jesus? What does it mean to be a good person? Jesus says, well, it includes loving God with all of your heart, your soul, and your mind, your brain, your rational faculties, your ability that no other creature on this planet has to think critically, to ask questions, to have questions and doubts, let alone express them. Now, I'm sure there are Christians who would look at this verse and they would say, well, to love God with your mind means that you decide that you are going to not have questions and doubts. Like, oh, I have questions and doubts, but loving God with my mind means that I just kind of like shove those into the closet somewhere, like I did when my parents told me to clean my room. I just shoved everything in the closet. Just shove your questions and doubts into the closet and then pretend they're not there. And that's what it means to love God with your mind. and I would say it means the exact 180-degree opposite of that. When Jesus says to love God with your mind, first of all, I believe in scientific explanations of human origins. And then somehow as a believer, I believe that God is the creator, right? And so I think perhaps God created through what we would call, evolution, the Big Bang and evolution. And at the same time, then, because I believe God is the creator, that means that if you have a brain, you have the ability to think critically and rationally and ask questions. That means that God created you with that brain. God gave you the brain you have and your ability to reason that you used to figure out where to turn in your car to get to the worship service today, or if you're watching online, how to find our channel on YouTube or our Facebook page. The same ability to reason that enabled you to do that enables you to ask questions about your faith and think about what you really believe and what's important in life and your values and what gives you meaning, what inspires you, what guides you in life. I don't think that God would create you with a brain capable of that and then say, oh, by the way, don't use that when it comes to your relationship with me. I don't think God would create you with the ability to reason and think logically and ask questions and then say, it's okay to use that when you're driving your car or when you're on the internet or, at work. Just stuff your questions and doubts when it comes to anything that has to do with me. I just don't think that makes any sense. I think it benefits authoritarian pastors and politicians who just want you to do what they tell you to do. I think it benefits them. I don't think that makes any sense that the God who created you with a brain would say, no, ignore questions and doubts when it comes to your relationship with me. I think loving God with your mind means that you would view your questions and your doubts actually as a strength to help you decipher the good from the bad, what's helpful, what's not, what's true, what's a lie, what's healthy, what's unhealthy. And even in what we believe, our theology, like what's toxic theology versus no, what is actually healing theology, right? Like what beliefs have I been told that maybe I need to let go of? And what beliefs do I need to be open to and maybe embrace? So it's not just that it's okay to ask questions and doubts. My view of what Jesus says is the main thing, loving God with your heart, soul, and mind, is that's part of me being a good Christian, a follower of Jesus, is being honest about my questions and my doubts. Adam Hamilton writes this on page 3, actually, in his introduction. Doubt is not only natural, it is healthy, provided it spurs us to further reflection and to search for what is true. So doubt is, of course, is natural for anyone who can think for themselves, but it's healthy if it helps point us to what is good and true and beautiful and meaningful in this world. Jesus tells us to love God with our minds. So to the question of, does God exist? It's interesting because I think that for some Christians, this is an important question to them. So they try to support their belief in God's existence with arguments that may not really be as sound as they think they are. So I remember back in college learning about philosophical arguments that were supposed proofs for the existence of God. There's the ontological argument and the cosmological argument and the argument from contingency. And there are other philosophical attempts to prove God's existence. And I never really found those supposed proofs convincing. And then, there are folks who think that somehow they could maybe use science to prove God's existence. Like, okay, scientists, what came before the Big Bang? And so they try to use the scientific method and try to prove God's existence out of that. And even if that were possible, it doesn't mean that you would therefore be proving the existence of the Christian God, the God of Jesus, and because of that, we should hang the 10 Commandments in classrooms. Like, you would have to make several logical jumps in order to get to some kind of proof of God like that. And then there are others who maybe they would like to prove that God exists in some way, but it's because they have an understanding of the faith that maybe is a little more otherworldly even than what the Bible is. So, for example, I believe that God exists. I believe in an afterlife. I want to go to heaven when I die. I want to be reunited with my loved ones when I die. And I accept those things by faith. I have questions about those things, but I accept those tenets of our faith by faith. And at the same time, it's important for me to say this. If when I die, the lights go out, and it turns out there is no afterlife, and there is no supernatural, and some of what I believed is not true, it's important for me to say this. I still believe that the way of Jesus is the best way to live in this world. And my faith in Jesus tells me that I want to be more about the here and now anyway. than about some other place, some other time. Jesus taught us to pray, Lord, your kingdom come, your will be done. Where? On earth as it is in heaven. So I would say that for Jesus, faith is more about the here and now and how we live and what we do in the here and now than it is by and by pie in the sky. Again, I believe that God exists. I believe in an afterlife. I want to go to heaven someday. I'm in no hurry. I'll take my time, but I want to go to heaven someday. However, I still believe that the way of Jesus is the best way to live, aside from any attempt to try to prove God's existence. So I'll just say it clearly like this. I don't believe that we can prove or disprove God's existence intellectually. I don't think that there could be a branch of science that could ever attempt to prove God's existence or disprove God's existence. I don't think that philosophical arguments will get us there. I believe that whether or not you believe in the existence of God is a matter of faith. And more important, much more importantly than that, than just believing that God exists, what will that do for you in the here and now? How will that inform how you live? How will that inspire you to greater meaning and purpose in the here and now? So I believe that it's a matter of faith. Now, that doesn't mean that faith and your rational faculties are enemies, or that faith and science are enemies. It doesn't mean that faith and reason are enemies. If God gave you a brain, then you can use it. Now, not only that, but I believe that our ability to think and reason can actually point us towards meaning and goodness as we study what I would call God's creation, what an atheist or an agnostic would just call the natural world, but I would call God's creation. So for example, Carl Sagan was probably the most famous scientist of his generation in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even in the 1990s. He hosted a series called Cosmos that probably taught more people about space exploration than any textbook. And he wrote a reflection on a photograph that was taken in space that is one of the most inspiring, meaningful, beautiful commentaries on the human experience that I have ever heard. It's called The Pale Blue Dot. Maybe you've heard of this. And it's based on a photograph that was taken of Earth on February 14th, 1990 by the Voyager 1 space probe from an unprecedented distance of 3.7 billion miles from Earth. That's the orbit of Pluto, poor Pluto that got downgraded from a planet and is now something else. That's how far Pluto is. 3.7 billion miles from Earth. And Voyager was actually launched in 1977 to explore space, and it's still traveling. It's the most distant human-made object from Earth, and it was the first object to leave our solar system. And while Voyager was almost too far away to take a photo of Earth, Carl Sagan asked NASA if they would turn Voyager's camera around while there was one last chance and take a photograph of Earth. And NASA acquiesced, and they took this photograph of Earth that has since been named the Pale Blue Dot. Here it is. Can you see us in this photo? Can you see Earth? Earth in this photo is less than a pixel of the photo. It's so hard to see. I'm going to show you one more photo with a red circle, circling the Earth in the photo. Look at that. You can see why it's called the Pale Blue Dot. There it is. The planet that you and I live on, that houses everything that you and I have ever known and every person who has ever lived. There it is. That tiny speck suspended against the vast expanse of space and those cosmic sun rays. And Carl Sagan, who was an agnostic and a brilliant scientist, wrote a reflection on this photo called the pale blue dot. It's about 3 minutes long. He recorded it, so this is his voice reading this reflection that he wrote when he saw this photograph. It's called Pale Blue Dot. Let's watch.
That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines, every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There is nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate. Visit? Yes. Settle? Not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known.
Think about all the anxiety that we live in right now with world events and the beauty of Carl Sagan's reflection that we can be humble and kind and have the big picture perspective of this little planet that we call home, this little pale blue dot, and how that perspective can give us meaning and inspire us towards goodness and beauty and to treat each other kindly. Look how beautiful that reflection is, written by a scientist who is an agnostic, a skeptic, but his ability to think rationally and the ability of astronomers and engineers to design a camera that can travel 3.7 billion miles and turn around and take a photo points us towards beauty and meaning. So not only is it okay to be a thinking person and to be honest about your questions and doubts and acknowledge your rational faculties and your ability to reason, but Jesus says it's part of the main thing, that we can love God with our minds. Now, it's perfectly okay to have questions and doubts, and certainly about metaphysical claims about the supernatural and so on. But whether you call it faith or belief or spirituality, whatever you might call it, I have 100% certainty about this, that faith and what we believe and what we trust in has the power to absolutely transform our lives. I'm 100% certain about that. And Jesus had a conversation with a very religious man who probably was 100% certain about metaphysical realities, and had no real questions and doubts, at least that he would acknowledge, for years and years. And he believed what he was told. But apparently something happened that tipped his apple cart over. Something happened to poke a hole in take a brick out of his wall. And he wanted to have a conversation with Jesus, but he came to Jesus at night, under cover of darkness, in secret, apparently where no one else would know that he had some questions and some doubts that were emerging. And Jesus had a conversation with him that is essentially about openness. How open are you to new experiences, to new insights, to new thoughts about the meaning of life and spirituality? Are you someone who believes that you have 100% certainty about every theological question, and you've got the Bible reduced down to a bullet point list of factoids that you affirm, and that's your creed, your statement of faith? Or are you open to the Spirit of God, what God is doing in the world, and what God might say to you, and how God might lead you in a different way that might be surprising to you? How about how you might change your mind as you go throughout life? Jesus had a conversation with this very religious man who had been certain for years about being open to what God was doing in his life. And it's in John chapter 3, one of the most famous passages in the Bible. Of course, John 3:16 comes from this conversation. But Jesus said to this man, Nicodemus, that if he were to become open to the Spirit of God, to what God wanted to show him and how God wanted to lead him and inspire him and guide him, that it would have such a radical, life-changing impact on him that it would be like being born all over again. That it would be like starting all over again, like everything you know is wrong, and unlearning and being humble and open and relearning life all over again. That's what Jesus said is the power of openness to new information, open to the Spirit of God. That's the power of faith. That's the power of somebody who trusts God and begins to see things in a different way and be open to new realities. Jesus says to Nicodemus in John chapter 3, verse 8, the wind blows wherever it pleases. You hear its sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from or where it is going. So it is with everyone born of the Spirit. Jesus says that God, or the Spirit of God, is like the wind. You can't see the wind, but you can see the results of the wind. You can see the effects of the wind, whether it's a gentle breeze, rustling leaves in a tree, or an EF5 tornado that destroys everything in its path. You can't see the wind, but you can see the effects of the wind. And Jesus says you can't see God, the Spirit of God, with your naked eye, or maybe not even with your five senses, but you can see the effects of the Spirit of God working in someone's life. So for me, the best evidence of God's existence is a changed life. Whether you call it God or faith or the Spirit of God or whatever terminology you might use, being open to what God wants to do in your life, the best evidence for God's existence is a changed life. I'll close with this. I helped start a church back in the 90s in my hometown in Ohio. And pretty soon after we started the church, we also started a Celebrate Recovery ministry in that church. And at that time, Celebrate Recovery was new. Celebrate Recovery was started in 1991. And it was started by a gentleman in Southern California who believed that Jesus was his higher power. And he was in recovery, but wanted to integrate his faith with his recovery. And so we launched Celebrate Recovery in this church. And one of the common misunderstandings of Celebrate Recovery is that people who belong in it are people who have, just chemical dependency issues, or like the common issues you would associate with recovery or 12-step programs. But Celebrate Recovery is really for everybody. And they published a graphic actually to get this point across that Celebrate Recovery isn't just for the common things that you would associate with 12-step programs, but it's for people who struggle with fear or panic or anxiety. Anybody struggling with those right now? Or an addiction to anything? Workaholism, overspending, codependency, relationship problems, victims of trauma. How about people who've experienced religious trauma, people pleasing, grief, marital issues, low self-esteem? Have we left anybody out at this point? I think we've included everybody in that list. And there are lots more things. But Celebrate Recovery is for just issues that every human being has to deal with. Everybody is included. And so we started a Celebrate Recovery ministry in this church. And now here at the Well, we're launching a Celebrate Recovery ministry publicly the week after Easter on April 27th. But every week until then, we're having info meetings about Celebrate Recovery at 11:15 a.m. right after the service in the orchestra room at Perry High School. Last Sunday was our first info meeting, and it was just an informational meeting, and it was really moving to hear people talk about what Celebrate Recovery means to them. And then somebody gave their testimony, but it's a mini testimony. It's like 3 to 5 minutes, and they call it a mini-mony. So somebody gave their mini-mony, and it was incredibly moving. Today, right after the service, if you're live with us in Perry High School at the informational meeting at 11:15, a person who is a member of the LGBTQ plus community is going to give their mini-mony, which is a really big deal in Celebrate Recovery and in the history of Celebrate Recovery. And if you have any kind of nudge that maybe, Celebrate Recovery would be helpful to you, maybe you saw something on that list, or maybe there are lots of other things I think this could be helpful to me. I want to encourage you to attend that meeting today at 11:15 a.m. I would love to see the person giving their mini-mony today just feel overwhelmed with support. If that room would just be full of people who right after the service walk right over there and just listen to them give their mini-mony and get some information about Celebrate Recovery. So I really want to encourage you to check out that informational meeting today. But back to my story, back to the 1990s, which I wish I could go back to in a lot of ways, actually. Back, to this story when we launched Celebrate Recovery. There was a gentleman, I'm going to call him Bob, who came to the church and to Celebrate Recovery just a few weeks before this took place. And I got to know Bob a little bit, got to hear his story. He experienced some pretty serious things as a child that set him off on a path of not being able to deal with the pain that he experienced. And as he got older, he started to self-medicate in various ways. Alcoholism was a part of those things. Once again, Celebrate Recovery is for everybody, but he dealt with alcoholism and other things. And he had been in a car accident not long before coming to the church. He wasn't driving, but alcohol was involved in the accident. And at least one of his friends in the car with him passed away. It may have been more than one of his friends in the car with him were killed in that accident. And so he had survivor guilt that he was dealing with, and the trauma of witnessing his friends killed in an auto accident. And he hit rock bottom. And he said that he remembered somebody as a family member who was a good follower of Jesus. They were a good person. And he said, I need that in my life. And he opened himself to a spiritual connection with God that he had not had before. And so he showed up at this church. He got involved in Celebrate Recovery. And every week he was passionately moved by what he was experiencing. This is a man who had gone from death to life. And he would just shed tears during the worship music and the sermon, and after the service, just be visibly moved by what he was experiencing. He was going to celebrate recovery and talking about his story for the first time, getting things off his chest and listening to other people share and experiencing community and healing and hope for the first time in his life. I remember after a few weeks of being there, after the service, he had been so moved by the worship and the sermon. He was shedding tears, and he walked up to the pastor who was shaking people's hands, and he grabbed the pastor's hand and just moved and out of the depths of his heart, he said, "Pastor, that was a hell of a sermon." And then he said again, "Hell of a sermon." And then he just walked away, and he was wiping tears out of his eyes. And there were, this is church. There were church people standing around like, wait, did he just use hell outside of the biblical context? Like they were waiting for lightning bolts to strike or something. And it was just funny, that these church people were like wondering, is this okay? Or they're looking down in judgment on Bob. And, I thought to myself, how does God look at Bob right now? Is God like, Bob, man, you were on a good path, getting cleaned up and celebrate recovery, joining a church, taking care of these issues, getting healing. And now look what you did. You went and you said HE double hockey sticks out loud in church, outside of the biblical context. Bob, I thought we had a good thing going. Is that how God looked at Bob in that moment? I don't think so. Here's how I think God looked at Bob. That's my boy, Bob. And I'm proud of him. And I am elated that for the first time in his life, he has been plucked out of the miry clay that he had been wallowing in, and he has moved from death to life. He has hope. He's on a pathway towards healing. He's in community with other people who are looking for that same healing. You would not believe how much I've changed his life even in the past couple of months. That's my boy Bob right there, and I'm proud of him. And he's a work in progress like every single person is. But he's doing great in life, and I'm proud of him. And I'm going to just keep working and radically transforming Bob's life. Do you think that's how God looked at Bob in that moment? I do. And that's how I think God looks at all of us. When we open ourselves with questions and doubts, right? It doesn't mean that every question gets answered the way that we would want. There are things that I still hold in tension. Doesn't mean that everything has a nice pretty bow on it. But with our questions and doubts and in the mysteries of life, we open ourselves to God, to faith, to a new kind of spiritual life in a way that we haven't before. And all of a sudden, regardless of questions that people have or, philosophical questions about God's existence and so on, all of a sudden, I've seen this time and time again, people's lives, our lives, begin to be radically transformed and changed for the better. So to the extent that people like Bob move from death to life, on the path to destruction, onto a completely different path toward healing and goodness and hope and God working through them to help other people have healing and hope. And you know what I'm talking about. You've seen this in people's lives when we're open to God. That's what Jesus told to Nicodemus. When we open ourselves to the Spirit of God, it's so powerful. And people have their questions and their doubts, but it's so powerful that it can radically change a person's life to the extent that it's like being born all over again. What a shame it would be if there are good, decent, thinking people who have normal questions, normal doubts about faith, but they never get to that place of openness because somebody told them that they can't be honest about their questions and doubts, and those things become a barrier. And they think that kind of faith, that kind of spirituality is just, it's not for me. Because I can't be a thinking person and take my faith seriously. What a tragedy that would be. And Jesus says to us, actually, it's part of the main thing. You can love God with your mind, and that's a good thing. And you can open yourself to God and allow God to work in your life in amazing ways as a thinking person, as an intelligent, educated person with questions and doubts. You can still open your life to God and experience God's transforming power in your life in that way. So I'm going to close in prayer here in a moment. And we'll all close our eyes. I'll ask you, if you would please, where you're watching, to close your eyes. And there may be some of you that would actually like to do this physically, where you would hold out your hands like this. If you just can't bring yourself to do that, then maybe in your mind's eye. But if you're willing, if you would hold your hands out like this, let's go ahead and close our eyes. And if you're willing to hold your hands out like this, or just visualize it in your mind, I'm going to ask you to hold out two different things in your hands. The first is the questions you have about faith, the doubts. Maybe you've called it deconstruction or reconstruction, or art restoration, or whatever metaphor you use for these questions and these doubts that you have. If you would hold those out in your hands, as if to say, God, here are my questions, here are my doubts. I don't want to hide them from you. I believe you've created me with my brain, so it's okay to use it. And Jesus said that loving you with my mind is part of the main thing, the greatest commandment. And so I want to hold up my questions and my doubts. I don't want them to be a barrier anymore. And that doesn't mean that they're always going to get answered, but it does mean that I don't have to hide them. I don't have to pretend that I don't have them. I can be honest about them. And I'm not going to come to the same answer as the pastor necessarily, or the other people around me. But I can be honest about my questions and doubts because I want to love you with my mind. Would you hold those up to God? And then the second thing, if you would be willing, as you hold out your hands, would you offer up those things to God that maybe were on that Celebrate Recovery graphic, or maybe things that weren't on the graphic, but you know that they're things that you've carried? Maybe pain from the past, maybe it is trauma, maybe it's religious trauma, maybe it's guilt, maybe it's shame, maybe it's an addiction of any kind, maybe it's self-doubt, maybe it's insecurity, maybe it's a broken relationship that you've been struggling with for a long time, or loneliness, whatever it is. Would you hold those things out in your hands and say, God, I don't want to hide these from you either. Like Jesus told Nicodemus, I want to be open to what your Spirit could do in my life. And Lord, as a thinking person, I have questions, I have doubts, but I do want to open myself to you and your work in my life so that I can get on a healing path and I can experience your healing and your transformation like Bob did and like so many others have. Lord, I can be free and I can be liberated, and Lord, my anxiety levels could go down, and I could feel a sense of hope for the future because I'm allowing you to help me deal with these things. Maybe it is through Celebrate Recovery. Maybe it's through counseling. Maybe it's through talking to a good trusted friend, or just reading books about that thing, but getting on a journey, getting on a path toward healing. Would you hold both of those things out in your hands and say, God, I want to be open to you. Here are my questions and doubts, or to here are the things that I invite you to work on in my life, because I want to be open to you, or because the best proof of your existence is a changed life. And God, I invite you to change my life. Lord, for every person who is holding out their hands physically or in their own mind and offering their questions and doubts and their hurts, habits, and hang-ups, as they say in CR, they're offering those things to you. Lord, I thank you that you see them as they are and you look at them like you looked at Bob. That's my child, and I'm proud of them. And Lord, you are excited to work in their life in amazing ways. And God, I thank you for what you're going to do as we're honest about our questions and doubts in this series during the season of Lent. And I'm grateful, Lord, for what you're going to do through Celebrate Recovery and Connect groups that are starting, and all the ministry teams and groups in the Well. that you use to radically transform people's lives. Lord, we thank you for what you're going to do. In Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen.